Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Empty cities and towns. This is a subject that has greatly fascinated me for a couple of months after coming across an old 4chan/x/ thread of others describing their experiences with this phenomenon. I don't feel that this topic gets enough attention, despite its more grounded nature than some of the other topics discussed on /x/. What is the empty cities and towns phenomenon? The empty cities and towns. Phenomenon is a phenomenon where a city or town that should seemingly be teeming with life is otherwise dead or unnervingly devoid of people due to seemingly unknown reasons. Theories and explanations for this range from more normal reasons such as simply mixing up the town with a known ghost town due to lack of knowledge of the area, unknown physiological phenomenon, or evacuations for unknown reason to more esoteric and far-reaching theories such as glitches in the Matrix, military training and simulation sites, etc. What is the difference between this phenomenon and ghost towns? Ghost towns are towns and cities that were abandoned for known and explainable reasons, unlike empty towns. These reasons usually are a result in a slow decline in population over a few decades, economic difficulty in the area, and natural disasters. Plenty of information can be found about ghost towns on the internet, history books, and local word of mouth. How can I find these towns anon? While I am not an expert by no means, I can offer what I have tried personally to find these mysterious locations. Urbexing. While urbexing may be associated with isolated sites and buildings within known populated towns and cities, it is my belief that urbexing can cause one to come across similar and linked phenomena to empty cities and towns. Small towns with a mysteriously low population. Research towns with unusually low population densities, and see if there are any unusual circumstances surrounding them. I know that may sound unexciting and vanilla, but it is a good way to get a start in the world of the phenomenon, and maybe even provide your first opportunity to actually witness the phenomenon firsthand. Simply start country cruising. What I mean by this is to simply find a general region of relatively low population density, and to simply drive around until you find some sort of civilization. It's basically plunging in head first. This webpage has a decent collection of stories in which often familiar places are temporarily found to be totally devoid of life. Aside from those, I remember coming across a story in the comments of a post on Reddit once that made an impression on me and seemed genuine, though I've had a lot of trouble trying to find it again, so I'm just going to tell it as I remember it. Hopefully my questionable storytelling skills don't ruin the genuineness of it too much. It was about a guy who regularly walked along a certain route around where he lived, possibly with a dog, though I'm not certain. What I do remember is that, according to the guy, the area where he lived was usually a very busy place in the evenings when he walked, with most of the houses having their lights on, and very often with people visible outside coming and going or just hanging out. But one day, as he was walking his usual route, he found that on a certain street all of the houses had their lights off. There were no people visible anywhere, and it was abruptly very quiet. At first he thought it was a little strange, but he just kept walking until he eventually got back to a livelier area and finally back home. However, the next day he went for a walk. The same thing happened, with that one street being totally dark and empty in stark contrast to everywhere else. And the street was the same way the day after that, and the day after that, for I believe a little over a week. At that point, he had the idea to bring a friend with him when he went on his walk, but he didn't tell the friend what to expect. Still, sure enough, when they got to the street, it was totally silent and dark and empty just as it had been every day for the past week. So for a moment, the guy stopped talking and watched his friend to see how his friend would react. And after a short while, the friend commented on how weirdly empty and dark the street was, finally giving the guy the validation he had been hoping for. But to his surprise, almost immediately after he said that, the lights in the houses all along the street started flickering on, and suddenly some people could be seen moving around or walking outside. It was as if, he said, everyone was just standing perfectly still in their houses in the dark, doing absolutely nothing. And then suddenly they all came alive all at once as soon as the strangeness of the situation was pointed out. And every day after that, the street was just as lit up and lively as everywhere else.
Just to bump the thread in the hope that it will survive long enough to catch at least one more interesting story before it dies. I also have two mildly interesting stories myself, which are: 1. One night I went to a movie theater, and there didn't seem to be a single other person there, not even any staff members. So even though I had bought a ticket, there was no one for me to give it to. Instead, I just found the right number auditorium, sat down, watched the movie I came to see, and walked out, still never seeing another soul the whole time. That was the optimal Kino movie-watching experience, if you ask me. 2. One time a friend and I were driving long distance out in the western U.S., I think through Kansas, and we passed through a really small but dense town and decided to stay there for the night. I'm probably exaggerating it in my memory, but I felt like you could walk the diameter of the whole town in about half an hour, and around it, as far as could be seen, there was nothing but flat, empty land. We did find a hotel there, and the door was open, but there was no one inside, so we could just wander around. It was a very nice small place with a thoroughly 19th century style, fancy wallpaper, with the inside lit only by sunlight from the windows, and with a few real flowers in vases placed around. There were at least 3 floors, with one main floor, a basement where there were lots of circular tables with tablecloths over them, a second floor with a large portion of the guest rooms, and a vintage elevator a bit like pick-related for moving between them. Probably we could have just stayed there for free, but my friend managed to find the phone number for the hotel and called the owner, a nice older lady who eventually came over and let us stay the night for like $100 each or something. Nothing especially spooky happened, and we left in the morning, but the place remains in my memory like a dreamy bubble world, set apart from ordinary time and space. At least, it was certainly nice and unusual relative to what I'm used to, which is just endless miles of sprawling suburbs and cities.
I live in a city of just under 1.5 million people, and yet even on Christmas Eve I hardly saw anyone on the roads and highways. What's going on? My city isn't the one people fly out of either. It's the one people fly to. So there should be more people on the roads than normal. Where is everyone?
Lockdowns changed basic social behavior.
About 15 years ago, I was heading home after partying in NYC. I was making my way back to Penn Station on foot at about 5 a.m. and at a 4-way intersection, and I remember looking down each of the 4 streets, and no one was out. Absolute stillness in such a busy place felt so uncanny I still remember it to this day. There was nothing paranormal about it, but even that mundane instance of it was that strong I can't imagine what an /x/ type of experience would be like.
My nearest city was jam-packed even during late evening when nobody should be around. Every car parking slot was taken. You'd have to circle around to find some crappy parking spot 6 floors up in a piss-stained multi-story building. If you went into the main city proper during peak rush hour, lunch, you could barely move. You got squashed up with people in large crowds. Ever since the goddamn plague, I can now park on the ground floor in a front access car parking space during the peak of lunchtime, and when I walk into the main city area it is sparse, like it went from thousands of people down into tens of people. You can walk freely, you don't bump into anyone. Even the worst traffic jam only takes 5 minutes as opposed to an hour. They're dead OP, I'm absolutely sure of it. Buses are empty. Even ones on busy routes are now going bust due to a lack of customers. Retail stores feel like deserts. The only exception are grocery stores, but even then I could remember when queues trailed up aisles. Now they barely reach the end of the checkout, during the peak of Christmas.
Did this occur in 2021? I noticed it around then, but at first I just felt the vibe. Kind of feels like being in an empty video game.
2020 was empty due to lockdowns. 2021 was still in lockdowns. 2022 and 2023 lockdowns ended, but the public did not return. The only place that was an exception was London, where the streets were still heaving, crowded to the point you could be forced onto the road. But It was all just migrants and expats. Locals almost non-existent. Outside of the migrant areas, the pavements were just as empty. At one point, I was walking along a main road, and the pavement was empty. I actually felt alone in London for the first time. This is not normal. I also lived next to one of the biggest heart surgery centres in the country. They had a helipad for medevacing patients to the hospital. Before the plague, it'd be like one a month. During the plague, there was a period where it was a dually occurrence, even twice on some days. That was pretty fucking bleak. My boomer neighbours told me they didn't like one of my bushes and that I should rip it out of the ground. They both died before that plant did. The lady's mother outlived her, being in her early 90s when her 60s daughter passed away. 4 guys I know also got cancer. One had a blood clot in his lung.
Me and her would go down to Miami for weekend trips all the time. We were together for almost 10 years, so we went quite a few times. It was so weird. Miami is a huge city. We would go to big events like a show or dinner at a nice place, then go to walk around or do some nightlife stuff, and we could never find anything going on anywhere. Clubs would be open with like 6 people in them, huge bars with like 3 guests, outdoor areas with carts to buy drinks at, with nobody around but the workers. It was always Friday and Saturday night. We went to tons of parts of the city and surrounding area over the years, and everything was empty, except you could tell there was a rich, upper-class type of people who were around, nice cars always driving, sections of road that would abruptly end at a gate to some upper-class condo building, really fancy hotels with people coming and going. We'd drive around the suburbs, Hispanic areas, no barbecues, no block parties, no loud house parties. We even joked at a few nightclubs, which we hated, and only went to the bar that we were the coolest people there, because no one else was there. This is all while I have researched and planned and looked online for the best places to go, multiple times, for multiple days, and planned it all out. It's fucking Miami. It's one of the biggest cities in America, and it's fucking empty. You could maybe blame it on the economy, people becoming less social, Zoomers especially, don't like going out as much, but it's just odd. Other places are even worse. The city close to me has a single strip that has activity after 5 p.m. It's so bleak and disgusting. Loud music, and feels cursed, so empty. I started to say, everyone is dead. I could feel it so strongly back then. You could hear it in the sky, the vast emptiness.
Be me. Hang out at a gaming store for D&D and Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh and stuff. Is in a strip mall. Barbershop, pizza place, car parts store, sign maker. Store is open to 11 or later. Other places all close before that, except for pizza place, which we walk down to get food often. Even when everything else is closed and few people are there, the parking lot is packed. Walk to the pizza place with bro. Everything is empty. There should be like 4 cars here max. There's like 30 plus. Weird. Drive by on a day I don't plan on going there. Usually I don't drive by since it's far, but I was on my way somewhere else. The parking lot is empty. WTF. Take a right and pull into the lot. Not a single car. The pizza place has all the lights off. The game store is locked with lights off. See someone in the sign store, which is creepy, so I dip out. I actually forgot about it until right now, but the sign store gives me the absolute creeps. There's always like 6 people there doing what looks like taking really intense tests. Or writing so diligently, and it's on paper too. They're not like cutting letters for signs. It literally looks like they're doing math homework after getting yelled at by their dad. And they're doing this both in front of and behind the counter, implying that they're employees and the public all doing the same thing, writing on paper so diligently and strained. We also had a weird experience with a cop, where a cop drove by and started giving us tons of shit for being there, because we had to wait outside for our buddy who works there to count the till, then would go back inside to game late. The cop was a huge asshole, which isn't out of the ordinary, but was very odd. There's also a Taco Bell and car parts shop that is like this. There's always like 40 cars parked there, and no one around. I always joke that it's a secret cult that meets up in these places. Maybe it is.
I posted the story before of my old neighborhood, where I lived at the first house and could watch every car come and go. There were tons of houses, and like 6 cars a day would come and go. My normie neighbor lady whispered to me, "All the fucking houses are empty." and her husband kinda stopped her from talking about it. I rode my bike around at dusk and counted the cars more diligently after, and realized she was right. There was some old person who was super creepy at the end of one of the streets who was like harassing them or creeping her out. My spooky senses say he might have been some kind of entity that owned that area. Maybe we are in hell. Next time you are out walking the streets at night, have a glance at each letterbox you pass by and count how many of them have mail sitting inside them. I swear 80% of houses I pass by have junk mail sitting inside their letterboxes that look like they have been there for months. I live in a city with around 200,000 residents and regularly walk around different suburbs at night. Shit's creepy desu. Most houses also rarely have lights on even between 7 to 10 p.m. when you would think someone is still home and awake. I am planning on going out tonight and cruising around for a few hours in hopes of experiencing the phenomenon. I live in Colorado, where there is a lot of glowy activity that goes on. If I do end up finding anything, I will keep the thread posted with pictures and video. Any suggestions of where to look in the state would be helpful. Here is a map of the military bases in the state of Colorado. If any of the empty locations are related to military simulation, in my opinion, they would be near the bases or out in the Rockies. For tonight, I will be heading out to the Rockies where there is relatively low population density. I went out to the Rockies last night as promised and drove for a few hours. I didn't see anything too interesting aside from one thing. While going in and out of the foothills, I came across the town of Loveland. Most of it was fairly active even given the time of night, around 1800 Mountain Time. Though on the outskirts of the town, I found an area that seemed a bit off to me. There was a few businesses in the area very clearly open, including a car wash, some kind of convenience store across the street, and a few other random businesses that I didn't care enough to check out. The area was completely empty, not a car or person in sight, including at the open businesses. Upon getting out of my car to investigate a bit, I went to check out the building and pick related. Completely open, though I didn't see a person in sight. Odd as shit. Though it is probably explainable in some way or another, and I don't really think this is related to the phenomenon. Here is another picture I took of the area of an open business that was open. I was a little too zoinked at the moment to even remember the details surrounding this one. Tonight I will be going out again, but I will be searching around NORAD and will take photos and videos regardless of if I find anything or not. My best guess is if they are military training and simulation sites, they will be remote and miles deep in the Rockies but close enough to an installation to make transportation or personnel there feasible.
And the thread died and OP was never heard from again. Or he'll probably come back with more pictures one day. So, this next part is selected sections of the web page mentioned earlier in the video. If you want to read all of them, then check the link in the description.
A world without living beings. In my article of Human Spontaneous Involuntary Invisibility, I have shown that some people experience being invisible to other people, but they themselves are able to see and hear these other people, although they cannot interact with them. They still seem to be present in the physical world, but they are of a slightly higher vibration. However, there are other experiences in which one cannot see any other person at all. It often starts with noticing an eerie silence, especially when there should be plenty of noise around. Then it is sometimes accompanied by a feeling that something is terrible wrong, and the person often becomes afraid. Sometimes one just wonders why it is so quiet, and one cannot find his family members at home that he knows have to be around. Outside there is no traffic. When it happens at other places, there are no people in otherwise busy places. In other words, you find yourself suddenly in a duplicate of our physical world minus any family member that you know should be home or on the street or in other buildings. Actually, there is an absence of any living being, including pets and even insects. In some cases also any moving vehicle, on traffic where there should be. You find yourself all alone. The sudden eerie silence is a marker for entering a strange reality. This eerie silence we find a lot with strange experiences in the woods, but also with encounters with UFOs, aliens, lights, and associated with unreasonable fear and the feeling of being watched. What is not so well known is that the same eerie silence and its associated features also happens outside the woods. It can happen anywhere, at home, on the street, at other buildings. When the eerie silence ends, you will find the expected members of your family at home, having been there all the time. They never saw you walking around the house looking for them, so it seems that you were in some sort of alternate reality. The eerie silence can also be short, and it is not always accompanied by other strange happenings, as in the following experience. I had a similar experience a few years ago. When leaving home for work one morning, I noticed something was off. When I closed the front door, it was silent, when normally I hear birds, cars, even the airport nearby, but this time it was dead silent. I could only hear my own steps and breathing echoing while making my way to my car. It was really strange, almost like my ears were plugged. I even stopped next to my car for a minute and looked around and couldn't hear a thing. It wasn't until I got in my car and started it up that the sound returned. The strange thing is that one can move around in this altered environment. How can one walk through a house, for example, and not find anyone there nor the sound they make, although they were there the entire time? And those people also didn't see the person looking for them. It seems that the person concerned shifted to a slightly higher dimension, one which is identical to our world, but which contains no living beings and no moving cars. Or is it a shift of frequencies, in such a way that the person temporarily shifted to a higher vibration, but is still in the physical world and can interact with it, but somehow he cannot see or interact with any living being since his own physicality has become of a more subtle nature? Physical sound might be limited to the physical world, and thus not heard in the higher vibrational state which seems to be devoid of those sounds, except those made by the person himself. In this altered state of reality, one cannot see other people or other living beings. This would suggest that one is in a much higher vibrational state, where only the physical world can be perceived, but no living beings or physical sounds. Let me also add that when the eerie silence is experienced in the woods and more than one person is present, the person who experiences the silence will not be able to see his companions, and often walks over the very spot where his companions claim they have been there all the time. But usually one is alone in the woods, and there one often experiences encounters with strange beings. There is also the question of how such an experience is initiated. Do we humans have an innate psychic ability to shift frequencies, although it mostly happens involuntarily, or does it get initiated by some other dimensional entities who like to have fun with humans? Or are Earth-generated energy fields responsible too? Take into account that it sometimes happens to more than one person at the same time, excluding a malfunctioning or hallucinating brain. People's experiences, in and around the home. His mother was home, but she didn't hear them shouting, nor did he see her. So a few months ago, I was going about my day doing jobs around the house and whatnot. Everything was normal and seemed fine to me. Later that day, I remember sitting on my bed and hearing my next-door neighbor start cutting the grass. But the sound of the lawnmower stopped a few seconds after it started, so me being nosy looked out of my window to see why it had stopped, but my neighbor wasn't there. Neither was there any signs of the grass being cut. I thought nothing of it, so I went back to minding my own business. Half an hour later, I went downstairs to go and ask my mum something, but she wasn't there. So I went outside thinking she would be gardening or sat enjoying the sun, but again, she was nowhere to be seen. I tried shouting out to see if she would answer, but she didn't reply. I started to go back to my room thinking she must have gone out for a walk or something. But as I was walking upstairs, I started to notice that everything seemed very quiet, and there were no sounds of cars going past outside. I went to look out the window at the top of the stairs that overlooked a road, but no cars to be seen or people out walking. 1 hour passed and I was sat in my room wondering where everyone was when the sound of my next-door neighbor's lawnmower started up again. I looked out my window, and there was my neighbor cutting the grass. I peeked over the rail on the stairs, and there was my mum sitting watching TV. I asked her where she went, but she was confused and said, "What do you mean I've been watching TV all day?" I'm still shaken and confused about what happened that day, and I'm hoping I never experience that again. At a shopping mall, no people, no cars. A few years ago, I decided to meet up with some friends for frozen yogurt on a Friday. we decided on meeting at this Cherry Berry that was part of a strip mall. For reference, there's a couple bars, a Buffalo Wild Wings, a 24/7 gym, and more within this strip mall. Places that would definitely be busy on a Friday night. This was also around 7 o'clock, when everything would still be open. I arrived at the strip mall and parked. The odd thing is, there was absolutely no activity at this place. All the venues had their lights off. There were no other cars in the parking lot, and there was nobody in the buildings. I thought this was odd, but just assumed the place was having power issues and had to close down or something. I was about to text my friends that we should head somewhere else when I received a text from one saying, "We're here. We just walked inside." I told them exactly what I saw and asked where they were, and they said, "Go around the back." I decided to walk around the back of the strip mall and tried to get in the back door. No use. It was locked. I walked back around the building, and everything had changed. Cars all over the parking lot. Lights on in the now open buildings. People inside. I was dumbfounded and decided to check my phone again. The only text that was in the group chat was the "We're here, we just walked inside" text. No messages from me asking where they were. No message from them saying, "Go around the back." I went inside the Cherry Berry and explained to them what had happened. They thought I was crazy, rightfully so. I still don't know what to make of it, but it creeps me out to this day. Walking down a busy street that is empty. So when I was younger, I usually went to my grandmother's place on weekends. Her house is just one street away from me, so I usually walk there. When I left the house, like in my yard, I could hear all the cars on the street and people talking, laughing, etc. But when I got to the street, there was no one there. No people or cars or actually anything. It just looked like the place was unpopulated. I didn't really care, so I just walked right to my grandmother's house. Still, even on her street, there was dead silence everywhere. I went into the house, and when I looked back at the street, it suddenly became fucking populated. Like kids were all over the place laughing and running, and all the cars were actually moving and making noises. After that, I talked to my grandmother and asked her if the street was noisy all day. She told me that it was, and she even couldn't sleep from the noises. I was terrified, and I still can't explain what happened that day. On the subway. An eerie silence again in an otherwise busy place. Around a year or two ago, I was around 20 or 21, and I was riding the subway towards the airport. Now, this wasn't the first time I took the subway since I was studying in the mainland, and I lived on an island. I was used to traveling from and to the airport. It was around 1 a.m., and it was the final subway for the night, and around 4 or 5 stops until the airport. The train stopped and a few people walked out. I was inside with around 10 other people in the subway car when the time seemed to stop. The doors of the subway didn't close after a while, and I decided to put my head out of the subway door, and I couldn't hear anything outside. When I mean nothing, I mean nothing. No cricket sounds, no dogs barking or cars in the far. The streets were empty except for the streetlights being on, but I ignored it and put my head back into the subway. That's when I noticed it. I was alone in the subway. I couldn't even see my luggage that was by my side a few minutes prior. It was eerie. I put my head outside the subway again to see if someone had left, possibly with my luggage, but nothing. All I could see was the same quiet scenario. I put my head back into the subway, and Lord and behold, the door closed and my luggage came back, and even the people. I then decided to talk to a tourist that was by my side, and I asked what had happened. She looked at me and seemed confused. Apparently, we had only waited around 2 minutes or so, which was the regular time for the subway to wait at the station. But to me, and until this day, I swear that was at least a good 10 minutes of dead, creepy silence.
What if everyone's not missing, but just poor? Gas is expensive as fuck, and new cars get worse gas mileage than cars from 20 years ago. And the car, plus insurance, is also expensive as fuck. A lot of people think about going someplace and then do the calculations on how much the gas will cost and decide to just stay in. When I was a kid, gas was like $1.20, and people would go everywhere just because. One place was the mountains about 60 miles outside of the city. I noticed that when gas got really expensive, nobody went to the mountains anymore. Having to buy a $30 a year pass to visit the mountains you already paid for in taxes didn't help much either. Only really hardcore and rich hikers even bother now. Maybe this is what poverty looks like in the age of game consoles, Netflix, and internet games.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.